think we're going live. Yes, we are. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Today we are going live. Welcome to Nate's Studio Desk. My name is Nate. And one thing is that going live is really hard, but what makes it worth it is all the interaction with all of you. So appreciate all the comments and any questions that you have as we go along. Today we're going to be talking all about how to leverage your skills to help you succeed in your career. So we'll be talking about how to get the most out of your current role and position and really taking a deep dive in just your current role now. And then we'll be going into how you can pivot to another position in your industry. And then we'll pivot to how do you pivot to a different industry. So how can you leverage your skills in a new industry? So I get this question a lot in terms of, how do I actually leverage those skills for a different context? So that's what we'll be talking about all today. And so we'll just dive right in. And so another aspect too of this, and reason why I'm also really excited about talking about this topic is that people also ask me, like, do you miss the architecture industry? Do you miss working in an architecture office? And one of the things I still kind of pause when I hear that, because in my mind, I'm still doing the same things to a certain extent. It's just in a different context, and some of the details and particularities might be different. But when you take a step back, what I'm doing is pretty much the same thing as what I was doing at an architecture firm. So very broadly, I'm looking at, identifying problems, discovering problems, looking for opportunities, and then providing solutions to those problems or potential opportunities that would help that project along. So at its very basis, a lot of the things that you would do in a different context is actually quite similar if you start to kind of take away some of really like the particularities of that particular industry. Now, of course, you're not going to necessarily be using, very specific knowledge like what are the dimensions of a brick or this particular code in this particular circumstance. But you can, even in those very specific examples, what you can learn is what is the process in which we discovered that code, or how is that knowledge shared within the architecture firm? So anyways, that's just a little preview of some of the things we'll be talking about in terms of current role, positioning and shifting to a new role within that industry, and then pivoting to a new industry. Then we'll open it up throughout the whole process. You can ask questions, and then you can also, then we'll shift to looking at design tools. Recently, I've been using like ChatGPT and Rhino. So any questions that come up in terms of Rhino, or literally any questions that you may have, just drop them in the chat and happy to answer them. So the first thing we'll talk about is just your current role and how you can succeed in your current role and how you can leverage your skills and how to really think about your current role. So no matter what you think or feel about your current position, if you're frustrated, if it's a really bad situation, if it's a toxic situation, we've all been in those types of environments. And it might even be in a place where you know that, hey, this is not really where I want to be, or I don't agree with this particular company and I just want to get out. And I completely get and understand all those types of sentiment. But what's really important to also keep in mind is that no matter where you work and whatever company or place that you work, you can learn a lot about how they conduct their business and how they get projects complete and how they work as a business. Because whether you like it or not, they have been successful enough to be successful as a business, or at least successful enough to hire you into that current role. And so even if you're really itching to kind of pivot to a new industry and all those kind of things, I really encourage you to really understand the current, kind of learn as much as you can out of the current position. So how do you actually do that? What does that actually look like? One of the things that's really valuable to really dig into is the process. Now, I'm someone who is all about process, so I'm slightly biased in this way, but this is also something that can help you then use that understanding of process in new firms. So, what do I mean by process? Now, in the architecture industry, when we think of process, we typically think of, like a design process and iterating through a design. But what I'm actually talking about, and that's important too, but what I'm actually talking about is like management process and the process within a working firm. How do they do their standards? How do they operate and communicate? What are their standard operating procedures? Some firms have that written down. Some of those standard operating procedures. Some don't. But either way, really getting a firm grasp of, okay, how do they do their Revit standards? How do they manage that process of templates? How do they conduct meetings? What are the standards that they apply when they are conducting meetings? Like, do they take notes? How do they report on that agenda? All those items are really critical to understand because every single firm is going to have a slightly different process. And then when you go to a new position, you'll then have all that knowledge in terms of how did they work and why did they do those particular things. And then you can start to see how another place either does something better or there's certain things that can be improved. And then now you can kind of help facilitate or help come up with solutions for how that business can operate better. Another aspect of kind of looking internally and at your current role is also understanding the vision and the goal of the company and how they operate within their own industry. So understanding like where they get their clients, what their like objectives are, and sort of some of that external facing items that they do. Again, that kind of still goes back to the process. Of course, there's a lot of other things that you can learn within a position, which is just understanding what your current role is really well. So even if you're doing mundane tasks, kind of taking that step back and looking at, okay, what am I doing? How do I fit into the overall structure of this company? What is the structure of the company? And if it's not clear, you can ask for clarity and you can start to unpack some of those things. And kind of this like business operations, we'll just call this like business operations, is really important no matter where you go. And you can use that literally in any industry. So it can be really helpful. And then with any, like in terms of the actual technical skills, this is also something that, you can really dive into. So no matter what kind of software you're using, just learning and understanding that software really well can be really beneficial further down the line. What that can look like is sometimes it looks like looking through manuals. Other times it means watching lots of tutorials and learning that software really well. Now, I've worked in a couple different architecture firms in the past, and they used ArchiCAD. They use others used Revit, others used CAD. Some didn't even use BIM software, and I'm really happy that in each one of those positions that I just dove in and try to learn as much as possible about whatever software they were using. And there have been challenges where I'm like, oh, I wish we could use this other software because it works so much better. But there's a lot of value in actually just saying, hey, I'm going to dive into this and really learn how to use it. And then whenever you're learning a new software or you're in a new position, it's going to be a lot easier to then learn a new piece of software because whether you like it or not, a lot of these softwares really operate the same way. So it was pretty easy for me to learn ArchiCAD because I knew Revit really well. It was just a matter of kind of reorienting myself to some of the logic and thinking behind ArchiCAD and some like really just weird nuances. But I learned it like 10 times faster just because I knew Revit really, really well and I understood sort of the layers and the logic behind the program, which you can do by just using the program a bunch and like actually figuring out how the program works. It's not magical or scientific by any means. But yeah, and then when I was learning ArchiCAD, I understood those different levels and said, okay, hey, they don't do families this way. They do direct modeling and so on and so forth. So that is your current role. And then another thing that would be good to do as well is in your current role, really understanding, again, it's that kind of like reflection point of understanding what you do really well in your current position. What are the things that you don't excel at? And another framework that you can use for this is what takes effort and what comes really easily. So for some people, like heads down, like working out the details could come really easily, but doing a client presentation could take a lot of effort, or vice versa. So charting and understanding what takes effort and what comes really easily. And what's surprising about that is it changes depending on the particular individual, and you just figure that everyone else is like you are, but that's not always the case. So for me, what I realized is I really like doing more of that client presentation, even communicating with consultants, having that conversation, moving the project forward. And what took more effort was doing those finer details of just getting out like Revit details and construction documents. Even though I had a construction background, those kind of things, those sort of like day-to-day documenting items, it took more effort. And because of that, when I then wanted to pivot to a different industry, I understood sort of this. I still like that overall, finding the problem and solution, working through that kind of like design problem, but then also like working at a higher level. And that's a lot of the times when you're in the tech industry, you're working at a broader level because, at this point, I'm working on identifying problems and solutions that would span across a very large portfolio of buildings across the world versus working on one particular project in one particular location. Yeah, so those are really important items. Let me know if there are additional things that you've been thinking about or things that in your process or day to day that you find valuable to learn in your current position. And there's actually some really helpful tools online. I really like this one place. It's called Teal 8. Is it Teal HQ or HQ Teal? Yeah, it's Teal. And you can actually take Teal HQ. Yeah, so Teal HQ actually has this assessment that you can take. And what's cool about that is you can take this, it's basically like a skills and work assessment. And it takes a lot of, let's see what it's called, skills assessment. Yeah, it's just called Identify My Skills. And what's cool about this is you will take the survey. It will identify what comes easy, what doesn't, what do you do well, what do you not. And then you can also share this with your work colleagues and they can fill out that information as well. And it can be really interesting because it's hard to get feedback and to get honest feedback as well. And being able to actually send out this survey to other people to have them fill out gives you a lot of clarity in terms of how other people perceive you and your work. And you can also do this to family and friends and also to work colleagues. What I found fascinating when I filled this out was there was a bit of a discrepancy between my personal friendships and between my work colleagues. And that was really interesting to kind of see the differences there. But just a really good way to get some feedback on your strengths, and that kind of helps with your own personal like vision and what you kind of want to work on and identify as like what gives you passion and purpose within your current role. And the reasoning behind doing some of these items is when you do some of those tasks and kind of reflect, then it also helps with gaining a clearer vision of what you really want to work on. And then you can take actionable steps to get to that goal. And so instead of kind of like shifting around or moving to another position and kind of doing the same thing, if you really understand like, hey, I really like, let's take this client presentation example. Like, I really like this client facing role. You know, you can have that conversation with your manager, your principal, and see opportunities where you could fill in and learn from someone who's really good at that. You could take on more of like a marketing position within your firm. There's a lot of things that you can actually do in your current role to kind of position in the direction that you're really interested in. So another example would be like, if you do tend to really like coding and doing parametric design, at first you might have to do a lot of that stuff on your own time, and then you can slowly sort of like wrap that into your current workflow. And you can also then like do demonstrations with the firm on different like things that you're working on. And over time, that could look like pivoting to like being a specialized in Revit or a parametric designer. And you can do that all within your role. I will say that it does take a little bit of time. So there is a patience factor that is involved. So for instance, what I noticed is I did learn Revit really well, but it really took whatever firm I was working at, it would take around almost like 9 months or even more, sometimes less, kind of depending on how advanced they were in their Revit skills, to sort of start to identify me as, oh, that's the person I go and ask questions about Revit, or that's the person I go and ask questions about a Grasshopper. And so what that entails you to do is you are diving in deep and learning Grasshopper or Revit, because those are things that you find really exciting. But for someone else, that might not be the thing that is really like exciting for you. But no matter what role or position that you have currently, you can start to lean into those things. And then I would say just learn them really well, and then start communicating that to your firm about this knowledge that you have, and you can start to incorporate it more and more. And so like even just doing like a lunch and learn of like tips and tricks in Revit, or even if you just discover something, shoot it, make a quick video about it and share it with your firm. And then slowly over time, you can start to build expertise in that one particular area. But what that requires is taking that reflection point of, hey, what do I really like to do? And how do I fit into this particular firm? And what can I really lean into? And then once I've identified that, then I can dive deeper into that one particular area. So one example that I like to think about is I grew a garden last year, and I grew way too many things. I basically had a kale farm. And what I realized was I had to weed out certain plants in order for for other plants to thrive and survive and give really good, in this case, it was like kale and some hot peppers. So that is we have a question, so I'll answer that just in a second. So that is my advice in terms of like when you're working at an architecture firm, there might be lots of things that you might be excited about, but when in terms of, what comes easy, what takes effort, what am I passionate about, what am I not, that helps give clarity on the things that you can then cultivate and really dive deep on. Because once you're an expert in that thing, then you become more and more valuable to the firm as well. So we have a question here. Hi, do you have any advice on using Grasshopper to design for fire-safe design? Any plugins in mind? Fire-safe design. I'm curious, would this be like an analysis type of plugin? Or I guess when I think of fire-safe, I'm assuming that you're doing the documentation within Revit. So off the top of my head, I do not know any plugins. I will give some advice in terms of when you are thinking of fire safety. Advice on using Grasshopper to design fire safe design. I do not know. That would be an interesting thing to dive into. I'm sorry, I do not. I will say that it is helpful to, there's a lot of really helpful resources on Hildy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But they provide like fire stoppers and other things, and they'll have a lot of reference materials that you can use, as well as you can. I'm surprised you're not using Revit, I guess, but I'm more so thinking of travel routes. Oh, then materials. I'm sorry. I'm like automatically thinking of materials. Thank you. Yeah. So in terms of travel routes, there was spatiometrics, which had you could kind of create a you could upload your design and it could run like a fire safety thing, so you could see your like egresses and the lengths of those. I don't know any specific plugins that do that today. I'll have to dive into it. However, you could come up with a Grasshopper script to try to solve that problem. Maybe we could even try it with ChatGPT and see if they can figure it out. So I do know some online tools. Spatiometrics, I don't think is live anymore, but they had that functionality where you could open up a plan and then it would draw those distances for you. And that, yeah, that is a tricky one, and that would be a really cool tool to develop and work on. Yeah, and it requires some like knowledge of the fire codes on top of that. So I'll have to look into that and get back to you. But yeah, keep the questions coming. Appreciate it. So that's really the encouragement, is to dive deep into that particular subject matter expertise, and then you can use that and sort of leverage that as being an expert within your firm. And then, of course, share that knowledge to the broader audiences. Cool. Yeah. Antonis. And I'm curious, so are you using Rhino? I feel like there's I've done some things in Revit that helped with that process. But what's interesting is a lot of the times, a lot of the firms that I worked on, we just did that process pretty manually, and in the documentation process, because it only happens, sometimes it's only on like one sheet. So yeah, that'll be a great thing to kind of like dive into. And I'm curious if you're actually doing the documentation in Rhino itself, or if you are going to to Revit, and because there might be some capabilities within Revit, unless you're trying to like do some rapid designs and make sure that they're are corresponding to the correct like fire codes and travel distances. But yeah, keep the questions coming. So we did a little bit of a deep dive on the current role and what you can do, and also checking out this Teal Skills HQ, and yeah, just ways of like understanding what your role is, how you fit into the overall company, and then taking that and leveraging those in different ways. So let's talk a little bit about if you are looking at going into other fields and or going into like positioning to another firm. Some things to think about would be, first, I would like definitely network and talk to people. And if you can talk to people at that company, figure out what the work environment is like. Another thing to consider is seeing if your position is actually going to change, and if there's nothing that you can do within your current position to grow or to change the position in your current company when you transition to a new firm, that you would actually be stepping into a role with higher responsibility. I think that's really important, that each step that you take is sort of like a strategic one that sort of builds upon the past experiences, and then you can come in and leverage those past experiences that you have and then bring a lot to that next role that you have. Okay, so we talked about identifying your skills, also researching your options. So looking at the other industries, we'll get to that in a little bit. Networking with people in your field, and then also developing a plan as well, I think is really important. I don't think you want to do anything sort of like last minute or rushed. That never really works out too well. And just sometimes you just have to kind of see what's available when you're going to position to a new firm or place, and then also understand what type of role you'll have in that new position, and are you going to run into the same frustrations that you have in your current role. And so that's really key, because what can happen is you don't want to necessarily be like wasting your time in terms of, okay, I went to this other place and then to this other place and this other place, and you're kind of staying at the same like experience level, and not building up those skills and kind of like diving deep and then launching off into like a new position, or launching off into a new position within that role, or into adjacent firm, or into a different industry. And so that kind of going back to that diving deep into the skills, that's one way that you can grow within your actual firm to then provide that launch pad for the future. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about hard skills and soft skills. And again, place chats. I'm happily can get off topic. Really, like whatever they are, whatever situation you're in as well, it's also really helpful. So if you're in a little bit of a tricky situation, please let me know what that is and how you're thinking about the future and pivoting into a new position, into a new firm or a new industry. Just let me know in the chat. So what does this actually look like? And I think this is where people get held up a little bit, because they're looking very specifically at, okay, these are, what does what does me knowing about the dimensions of a brick help me in this other industry? So there are a lot of details that may not be valuable, but there's a lot of skills in terms of hard skills and soft skills that will be valuable in any position that you do. So let's first talk about some of the hard skills. We talked a little bit about understanding software really well and leveraging technology. At this point, even if you are not inclined towards technology, for better or for worse, you do need to kind of come up to speed with some of these tools and learn them really well. Even if you don't use that specific software in another industry, just learning and getting more proficient with computer skills is very important, and will help you further down the line as well. So we have those like technical skills. So that's some of those things you might use and you might not, but you'll at least understand the process for learning that particular software, or even for building codes. You'll learn that process of identifying where to access building codes, and how everything works. The other is business skills, and this is very translatable. This is something that you can use everywhere you go. So that could be understanding how the business is run, understanding the marketing, the financing, the accounting. And this is where, when I was working in office, which was really helpful, which was I sat across a principal, and you could hear all those conversations happening. And you're just working on Revit, you're working out those details, but at the same time, you could hear some of the business aspects and business decisions that were being made. And so as much as you can tap into that, ask management or ask your principals or have a conversation with how things are going, a lot of the times just asking and just trying to understand what the current state of things are can be really helpful. Okay, then we have management skills. So management skills, so you might be in a management position or not, Definitely it's helpful to really learn how to work with other people. And one of the things about being a manager is it comes easier for some people than others, but I think it's really important to gain that experience and really understand and get feedback from the people that you're managing to really uh, grow that skill, because no matter if you're working in a tech industry or somewhere else, if you're able to leverage some of those, whether it's delegation skills or being a leader within your domain, managing and working with other people is essential in any situation, in any position. And that's something that I think being an architecture firm and industry can definitely help with a lot. Okay, so then we have some of the soft skills. So it's certainly communication skills. So if you went to architecture school, you're giving presentations, you're selling your work. It can be intensely personal, but it really shouldn't be. And that's one of the things you learn during architecture school is like communicating effectively, but also listening and understanding the feedback and not taking it personally. This is getting a little bit off tangent, but some little tips and tricks that I like in terms of not taking things personally is you can use a framework. I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head, but one framework that you can use is first you state what you are hearing from the feedback. So before reacting or responding to the feedback, if someone gives you a harsh criticism, you can repeat that back. So you can state it, and then you can kind of go from there. And that's kind of just like a helpful way to process the feedback in a way that kind of detaches your personal aspect, like your personal work to this thing that you've put a ton of time towards. So a simple thing is just like, yeah, it sounds like what you're getting at is such and such and such, and like, yes, or they could say, no, that's not what we're talking about. But that kind of helps deal with some of those critical feedback. Okay, so we have communication skills, teamwork skills, so working with other people, problem-solving skills. This one's obviously super important, which is really being a critical thinker. And part of that is, again, being aware of what the situation is, where you are at in the process, and then seeing how this could, I lost my train of thought there, but sorry, we'll move on. And then also just being adaptable and being willing to learn new things as well. It's really important. All right, so we're right at 33 minutes. Again, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. We can really talk about anything that you'd like. We can talk about design technologies, Rhino, what your current situation is, all that good stuff. One thing that I'd like to mention too, in terms of, so we talked about kind of that current role. Now we can talk about pivoting to a new industry. So we talked about the hard skills and soft skills that you can use, the kind of practical aspects. It's also just if you can reach out to someone in that industry and just kind of pick their brain and understand what's the kind of work that they do, and have them kind of like, even if they can look at your portfolio, and so you can really start to understand some of those particularities. Another thing is like just starting to get a sense for the terminology that is used in that industry. And so you can just say, oh, there is a term, I had no idea what that is. Let me look that up and what it is. When you are leveraging your skills for a new industry, or when you are pivoting to a new industry, you're still maintaining a lot of those like design thinking skills, in terms of like empathizing, defining, and ideating on ideas, coming up with solutions. And you are still going through the same process of learning new knowledge. And so if you go to architecture school or a lot of different programs, a lot of the times you're learning how to learn. And so you can kind of take that approach to also learning a new industry. Another common way that people pivot into another industry is by becoming a subject matter expertise in their area. They can leverage that subject matter expertise in another role where they can kind of provide guidance towards everything that's needed to know about that particular industry. So no matter what industry you're in, if it's medical, architecture and design, anything like that, if you know that industry really well, then you can take that domain expertise and provide the sort of like high level takeaways from that industry to another company that might be leveraging technology or using technology within that particular industry. And that's typically, you can go into a little bit of a higher role in that case because you're kind of seen as, okay, this person's kind of like the subject matter expertise in this industry. We're going to tap into them to really understand the users, really understand any issues that come up. And that can be a way to kind of leverage your current skills, is just actually knowing your industry really, really well. All right. So let me know if you have any questions here, any questions in the chat. A couple items, we can go through a couple updates. I'm trying to think if we really covered everything on the topic in terms of leveraging your skills, either in your current role or pivoting to a new position. One of those, the key items, just to kind of summarize, which is understand the process. To me, process is everything. And then the other item is learn from your mistakes. And so getting valuable feedback from your peers can be really challenging. But there is, I'm going to try to see if I can find this feedback framework, SBI, I think it's called. So there is a framework called SBI, Situation Behavior Impact Feedback Framework. And this can be a helpful thing to sort of get valuable feedback without making it intensely purposeful. What it looks like is you say the situation, you have the behavior, and then you have the impact. So situation, you would define where and when that situation happened. So just describing what the situation was, and then describing what the behaviors you want to address within that situation, and then talk about the effects those behaviors had when causing to the person or team member. It should be measurable information that you described. So I can drop that in the chat as well. That can be a nice framework that I came across recently that I really appreciate. So, and then also taking on new challenges. So diving into learning new technologies, learning the industry well, and then you can leverage those particular expertise. In my mind, that requires reflecting and really understanding what you're passionate about and what you really care about, and being actually authentic and realistic and honest about that conversation, because you don't want to necessarily become really good at something or dive into something that is just not something that comes easy to you. It's going to be a lot more challenging, and maybe you like that kind of challenge and that gets you really excited, then go for it. I don't want to say no, but the key thing here is you take on new challenges, but then also be really intentional and thoughtful on where those areas you want to dive deep into. And for me, it was really hard to identify those. And you can see that I've just done a ton of different experiences in a ton of different locations and a ton of different roles. And I get excited about a lot of different things. But so I get it. I think there's different points in your life that you do want to try out different things. But always kind of providing that reflection point, whether that's like every 3 months or 6 months, to kind of just take a step back and really understand, okay, what do I actually care about? What do I actually want to learn more about? What actually gets me super excited and passionate? And then you can bring that passion to your work, into your life. And if you're realizing that the current position that you're in right now is not sort of in line with those passions, that's when you start to look at what other industries could I apply my skills and knowledge. Design expertise can be applied in a lot of different arenas. So yeah, that's definitely one way to go about it. And then throughout the process, definitely staying positive and motivated. Sometimes the situation can seem overwhelming and very, it can seem like you don't really have like an option, or you feel stuck. And I would just say it's okay to be just a little bit patient with it. You have more time than sometimes it feels like you do. And so really take that time to be thoughtful and consider about what that next position or role you would take. And don't let sort of your expectations of yourself dictate sort of like, or limit yourself in terms of where you would apply or what types of things you could do. And so oftentimes I feel like in the industry, especially in architecture, it's like, I have to do this thing. I have to do, this particular, I have to be in architecture. But in fact, that's in my opinion, is not really the case. You can pivot to other things and focus in different areas. So I hope you found this helpful. We'll wrap up sort of the leveraging your current skills. Let me know if this was helpful. If you like these live streams, we can do some of them. We can do more of them. So far, we just had planned to do these 2. And I do have a couple like general channel updates, which is, we'll have some more videos coming out. And then if there's any topics that you would like to discuss in a live session, please let me know in the chat as well. Things that you would get really excited about learning more, or just having a conversation about. All right. In terms of channel news, we're still chugging away, making a couple videos. We're going to have one coming out pretty soon. Last night, just got randomly inspired to do a live stream on using this ChatGPT in Rhino, which was kind of crazy. Unfortunately, the screen froze, so I reposted the video as a normal video, so you'll be able to see that. So check that out, see what you think. And I think let me know if there's any questions in the chat. We'll give it a couple more minutes and see if anything comes across. Again, really, this is like an AMA session, so you can really ask me anything in terms of architecture, working in tech, really anything that comes into mind. And of course, I always like to learn more about your current situation and what kind of things you're thinking about, how you're thinking about leveraging your skills in the future, building up some of those skills. And if you are interested in other industries, what industries are those, and why? What makes you passionate about some of those things? So let me know in the chat if anything comes through. Not yet. All right. Well, I do have to say thank you all for joining. I really enjoy doing these live sessions. I appreciate the interaction with all of you. And I think that's going to be it for now. Again, write some comments, see the kind of comments, the kind of topics you want to see in the future. And thanks for joining. I really appreciate it. I really have a lot of fun with these, and I hope you do too. So we'll end this now unless some questions come up. I don't think they are. So we're going to say goodbye. Have a good day. And it's a beautiful day here in Atlanta. So I hope you all have a beautiful day wherever you are located. All right. Have a good day.